All right, everybody, welcome to another TLC conversation. Today, we're going to talk about the unique skill set of the optimization developer and how it is the same and different from all other types of developers. Before I introduce our panelists, just a couple of regular reminders here. First, the YouTube channel, which we've talked a bit about already this morning, but you can get there by just going to is.gd/TLC YouTube. I think it's actually case sensitive, which is kind of weird, but just so you know, that's the channel you can go to. You can subscribe to that channel, get updates every conversation that we have. The videos will be saved there, and all historical channels are there. So share it, subscribe, have fun, like it, comment, whatever. Also, October 10th, the Digital Analytics Hub Conference in the DC area. I will be there, and I'm hosting a live TLC panel with some industry awesome folks, and we'll be talking like tips and tricks and analytics and optimization and all that kind of good stuff. And you'll have a great opportunity to ask questions of some pretty awesome people. Ask me if you want a discount code. I can hook you up with a discount code so that you can register for the event. And the workshop is free, included with your pass to the conference, and includes a free happy hour. So join us, have fun, ask great questions, learn, drink. Can't get much better than that. Always, if you have topic suggestions, use the Zoom chat, TLC Slack. The TLC calls channel is the best way to do that. Or you can message me directly on the TLC Slack, or you can email me at kelly.wortham@searchdiscovery.com. All right, got all that out of the way. Now on to the reason you're all here. I'd like to introduce you to our panel. First up, we have David Parker. He's currently a manager of site optimization and personalization. He is a bit of a sports fan, Atlanta United fan, and general sports nut. He's a roller coaster junkie, me too, by the way. He's traveled to 16 of the 30 Major League Baseball ballparks, and for the last 12 years, he's been managing e-commerce websites with about 5 of those in A/B testing. So welcome, David. Thanks for being here. Chris, Chris, I'm a little surprised in here you don't have anything about being a beer aficionado, because I don't think anybody has your knowledge of beer. I should probably just start there. But Chris is our own senior optimization dev at Search Discovery, and I worked with him for many years at Dell before he joined Search Discovery. He is a certified expert in Adobe Target and front-end developer focused on, basically, he makes magic happen. For every test that we need to run, he finds a way to make it happen. He also has extensive experience with very complex test design, troubleshooting, and setup. So welcome, Chris. Thanks for coming. And Cory, if you don't know Cory, you're probably not spending a lot of time on the Measure or TLC Slack, because he is one of the most active members there, always providing really insightful content, asking great questions, and providing answers that none of us have been able to figure out. So really appreciate him coming here. He's currently senior programmer and analyst. He's got 8 years of front-end dev, optimization, analytics, and tagging experience. He's been the tech lead for LL Bean's A/B testing program for 7 years. He does both client and server-side optimization and personalization, and has unique experience in how optimization and personalization can run at the same time, which is a really common question that we get in the conversation in the TLC Slack. So got special questions for him about that, please reach out. And he's also active on the DAA forum. So basically anywhere that any of us are looking for answers, Cory's there providing them. So 3 awesome panelists. I really appreciate you guys coming today. And we're going to kick off our conversation asking a very high level question. And I'm just going to start, I'll use my screen over here where we have David, you first, then Chris, then Cory, and we'll just kind of go in order on some of these questions, but feel free to interrupt each other kindly and ask each other questions as well. But my first question, and we'll just start with you, David, is what do you think makes an optimization developer different from a standard developer?
So I would say in general, it's kind of their integration within the team. What we're finding with a lot of developers is they're very rigid in the sense that they're looking for an intake item, they're looking for a set of detailed instructions,
Right.
and they go work on that, and then they give you the final result, and then they move on to their next project. The difference with an optimization developer is they are usually interfacing with stakeholders. It's kind of a back and forth. Personally, from our team, we actually look for a lot of insights and kind of recommendations from that developer. So it does require a lot of back and forth. And that's the unicorn that we're always trying to find when we're doing this hiring, is that that person who's not just simply going to take a set of requirements and go and sit in their corner and they're going to bang away at the requirements. So that back and forth, that insights, that willingness to work with others and develop an ongoing kind of rapport with people who may not be very familiar with front-end development. That's probably the strongest qualification that we look for.
So they're the people who take the requirements and figure them out and then translate the requirements and then also follow through with the requirements?
So in our industry, or at least in our area, we don't have a lot of requirements. It's
they have to figure it out themselves. They've got to write the requirements based on their understanding of what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I need to build a vehicle. I may not need a car or a truck or a semi.
Right.
I just need a vehicle, right? And so the developer is like, okay, well, you actually need a flatbed truck.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So we need them to be able to. They kind of have to speak a couple different languages, is what it comes down to. Sometimes it'd be sales speak, marketing speak, product manager speak, and those people, those unicorns, are the ones that we hope to find. We don't always find them, so we're also looking for people that can be easily molded. We're looking for the people who are done with the traditional development stack and who are looking to build their business skills.
Gotcha. Well, you can't have Chris. Chris, does David's description of what makes you as an optimization dev different, does that resonate? Is there more?
Yeah. I want to add to that real quick that basically you have to learn how to extract the requirements, because you really got to kind of figure out like what it is that they want to do. So a lot of my stuff that I'll do is kind of, I will stress, best practices and kind of have people kind of lean on my expertise and be like, well, yeah, I know this is what's going to work best kind of in that area. So the thing that I wanted to touch on was, and what I tell people, and you'll find that a lot of my answers today are going to kind of center around this topic of, you really have to be able to see the big picture and the tiny details at the same time. Like, you really have to understand that your world kind of lives on top of all of the existing infrastructure. Like, everything that we're doing for A/B testing, personalization, all that kind of stuff is on top of what's already there. So you have to already have the full understanding of kind of how the site that you're working on works in general. And you have to have all the optimization business knowledge and the optimization technical knowledge. And that stacks on top of everything else. So it's all the requirement stuff. It's all the skill sets for the traditional development stuff. But most importantly, like, you got to know how to make your stuff work in the context of everything else that's going on and changing on a daily basis.
So you're saying it's easy?
Oh, sure. Yeah, no problem.
So before I switch over to Cory, let me ask you quickly, has it been a challenge for you to go from being the expert, not just about how to do optimization, but also the entire platform, integrated systems, the website? You knew everything at Dell after being there for so long, and now you're having to take those skills from a single company and apply them to all of your clients. Is there a learning curve that happens there?
Yeah, it kind of works both ways. So you can definitely kind of pull from your wealth of knowledge that you've built over the years and all the experience that you have. Right. And you'll find there's a lot of similar patterns. Yeah. So you can kind of pull from that bag of tricks that you've got, right? And go, oh, okay, yeah, I think I kind of recognize what's going on here. Maybe I can do it this way or that way. But then there's that other kind of 20% of the time where you're like, ooh, well, this is new. But then a lot of the times that's why people become developers, because it's that challenge. It's like, okay, this is something I've never seen before. I'm going to pull from that skill set that I have, and how do I figure out this problem and like come up with a solution? And so that's the beauty of kind of the optimization space, is everything's always kind of new until it isn't. So
you like being handed the new puzzles.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. What would you add, Cory? What did they miss?
So in addition to the two things that I really agree with both of them, but the things that I think, in addition to that, would be an optimization dev often, especially if it's a client-side system, has to be able to take a page and transform it into a different page.
Right.
And that's a much different mindset than just building it that way to begin with. And you have to be able to do that in a way that isn't going to cause like a UX issue where you're getting both styles of the page at the same time. And you also have to do it in a way that's not going to basically break the page using with whatever framework it's doing. And then in addition to that, I would say an optimization focused dev likely has a more in-depth, or should have a more in-depth understanding of how all the networking for the platform and the system work, and all the integration for the analytics and things like that, things that aren't commonly thought of when you're thinking like standard web development, but are really critical to the optimization piece specifically.
Right, because like standard web dev, they're really focused on, QA and, testing, as in making sure the website's not broken. But you guys also have to think about how are we going to measure the change that we're making. So we need to make sure that everything's tagged appropriately and that the data is going the way we expect it to go, and that we're able to actually analyze these tests. That's not something that a lot of web devs have to really put front of mind.
Correct.
That makes sense. Lee agrees with you. Yes, on analytics. Absolutely. It's a big, it can be a big gap. So you guys, I think you covered the skills that set you guys apart, but what about like, is there a difference in mentality? Is there a difference in personality? Can just any web dev become an optimization dev, or is there something unique about them? Are there web devs with certain personalities that can maybe be more successful as optimization developers?
I think Chris mentioned it. I forgot the exact terminology he used, but the person who is interested in exploring a little bit more, the person who is, I actually like Cory's stance, and I was going to argue with it a little bit and say, I actually like a developer who is willing to break things, because they are uncovering things that hopefully our customers are not uncovering. And they're able to kind of find some of these things first before our customers do. But the personality thing is, I would probably say, is the biggest challenge. Just because you're trying to take somebody who is normally focused on a very traditional role and taking them into a different side of the business. The biggest part for me is a person who has a personality willing to work with others, actively reaching out, and also being active in discussions. I'm not going to say it's difficult, but I would say it's probably been my biggest challenge, is finding that person, or a person willing to lead a meeting, lead a discussion, be ready to present their expertise, but then also still facilitating feedback.
Yeah, as somebody who gets to work with web devs and optimization devs and doesn't have, we'll say, any technical experience, I can tell you that, like Chris has been one of my favorite developers that I've ever had the opportunity to work with, because it's never, no, that's not possible. It's, oh yeah, that's interesting. Let's see what we can figure out. And what if we did it this way? And what if we did it this way? And, he's not afraid to put something lean out there to see if he's going in the right direction, and then work with all the various business owners and, the high maintenance people working with him that are asking for very specific things to figure out how to make it work. And that to me feels very different from a lot of the web devs I've worked with, who are just like, no, I need exactly the requirements of, every spec. I want to know what you want. I need to know the pixels. I need to know everything. And instead of, well, let's kind of figure this out together. So
absolutely. I think Chris actually mentioned problem solving. And I think that is a very valuable trait to have, is don't just be so rigid. Be willing to be like, okay, all right, that's a challenge. Let's go ahead and see what we can find out. Because at the end of the day, the business is simply looking for a solution. They don't know what the solution is.
Right.
So that's where they lean on the developer to say, I'm looking to you to help me understand what it is we can and cannot do. And so the developer willing to accept that as their input, right, their requirement, and turn it around and turn it into an actual tangible item. That's the guy or girl I'm looking for.
Well, let's flip this around. Chris and Cory, as developers, what is the type of cross-functional partner, like what do you want from them? What information do you need from them to start your problem solving and development? What kind of person is easier to work with, and what kind of information is most helpful?
So yeah, what I've noticed is you still have that fundamental developer mindset built in to yourself, right? So most folks that I've met in the developer community tend to be extremely detail oriented, and we'll put it that way. And so I still do appreciate, having at least some details kind of come in my way. But that's the thing, yeah, being in the optimization space, you quickly learn that, yeah, you're not going to get that full spec sheet and like, oh, here's a comp, here's the mock-up, here's like exactly what we want, here's all the assets up front. Like, wow, wouldn't that be amazing? Here's, yeah. And then you get into these interesting discussions with
amazing or boring.
yeah, can be both. So then you talk with designers, and that's usually where you get some friction there of like, okay, does it really matter if this is exactly 7 pixels away from that, or 6 or 4 or whatever? And so sometimes you do get that full list of specifications, which can, in the optimization context, actually ironically make it a little more difficult. Yeah. Because it's like, oh, well, now I got to try and like shoehorn that in there. And if you actually gave me a little bit of flexibility, I can kind of move things around and like, oh, in general, like this is just what you wanted. So, okay, cool, I can make that happen, versus like, this needs to go here, this needs to go here, this needs to go exactly there. Right. Then it takes me 10 times longer to actually get all that stuff exactly like how you wanted it. So to answer your question, to find somebody that can kind of understand that balance, that helps a lot. Like, give me a little bit of detail. Don't just be like, yeah, we want some new banner, and then stop talking, because, well, okay, yeah, I need a little more than that, please. But then you don't want the other end of that spectrum where it's the traditional development kind of thing, where like, okay, yeah, here's the full thing, because we do need a little bit of wiggle room there, because again, we're building our stuff on top of what's already there. We're not starting fresh from zero. So somebody that can be like, okay, yeah, this is kind of generally what we want to do. Somebody that I can talk to and kind of have that discussion or negotiation, depending on the day, and just kind of really, like I was saying, extract out of them, like, what is it that you're really trying to do? Kind of like, what's the KPI? Like, what's the main, what's the whole point of doing this thing, right?
Right.
And so if I can kind of figure out what they want, and it's somebody I can talk to, and I can easily kind of massage the details out of them and be like, okay, now I kind of get the basic idea of what you're trying to do. That's somebody that's really easy to work with.
You agree, Cory?
I do. In addition to that, I find it's helpful if the analyst takes interest in at least understanding the basic technical vocabulary as much as the developer would understand the analytic vocabulary.
Yeah.
Because that really speeds up conversations.
Wouldn't that be nice?
It would be nice. So in addition to what Chris was saying, I feel that having all of that stuff up front would make stuff very easy comparatively, because you're not just guessing the entire time. But I honestly think just having like a overarching view, what are you trying to do? And then is that this like one off, or are you going to like iterate on this? Because that could change how I would want to build it.
Yep. Was somebody asking a question, or somebody just not off?
I think it was the Eva thing.
You think it was Eva?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to mute Eva just in case. Awesome. Okay. So my next question in my list actually dovetails really nicely to the question that Val just asked on the TLC calls channel. I was going to ask you guys, how do you explain what you do to other devs? But Val is asking kind of an extended version of that question, which is that, if you're recruiting for an optimization dev, what are some things that you should include in the job description? And on the flip side, as an optimization dev who might be looking for a job, what would be some things that you would look for, and what would be some things that would be maybe a red flag that tells you maybe this isn't the job that you would be interested in?
It's quite fitting, because I literally just opened up a requisition yesterday for another one. So we went through the job requirements and said, you know what, we're going to keep this one simple. We can't get too funny in our requirements, unfortunately, because mine would be damn near hilarious. So one of the things in my requirements, I'm looking for a very strong front-end developer. If you don't have strong HTML, CSS, JavaScript, I'm not even going to proceed, because nothing else really matters at that moment in time.
Yeah.
However, in the interview, I asked the candidate, "Are you a magician?" And the reason why is I want to hear what they have to say. I want to understand what are they going to come back to me with, because the one who has an answer is the one that I want to further my discussion with. The one who doesn't have an answer or wants clarification, generally I'm not going to ask that. I'm not going to continue that. I mean, I'll continue the interview, but I'm not going to continue down that path. And the reason why is because the person who can answer the magician question is the problem solving, like Chris mentioned. They're the person who is taking low level or high level requirements and turning them into low or even detailed execution pieces. They're the person who is trying to understand the business, trying to understand the needs without having to ask the specific question, right? They're the people who are kind of being a little bit mind readers. I mean, they're the people who are just, again, problem solvers. They're the ones going out there and trying to find the solution if one may or may not exist right off the bat. So
I'm watching Chris and Cory's face, and I know that they're both thinking, how would I answer that question?
Yeah, it's
a good one.
I love being on this side of the table and
right?
this discussion. So
don't we all?
But 100%. So that's kind of how I approach things, and that's really is going to tell me a lot about the candidate when I'm going through the process.
And Chris, Cory, what are you guys looking for in requirements that would say, oh, that's a good fit? And conversely, what are you not looking to see?
Well, I know for at least a brief period of time on my LinkedIn, it did say I make magic happen. So I do have an answer for that question right up front. But yeah, it really is all about that problem solving, or I kind of think about it as like the hacker mentality sometime, which is an interesting combo because you need somebody that can talk to the business and marketing people, but then somebody that has that kind of hacker mindset, which usually those are two completely opposite things. So that's why it is such a very unique space that we live in. And so I always look for kind of like flexibility or sometimes moldability, because especially depending on who and where you're working with, they might have a very specific structure in the way that they want to do things, which then when you throw that into the mix of the hacker mentality and all the other stuff, that can get kind of complicated, where it's like you got to have somebody that can deal with that either ambiguity or just deal with the like, well, this is just the way that things run, and we got to make our stuff live within that world and work within that world. So somebody that's capable of dealing with all of that and it's not going to get super frustrated and be like, how am I ever going to make all this work? So that's can be a little bit tough to find. And then also, going back to that flexibility thing, like I'm one of those people that if I'm giving somebody a technical interview, like I don't care if you know the exact command for this or, write some code to like do this. Like as long as you know how to go like look it up and you've got that circuitry in your brain that can understand and learn very quickly, that's all you need. Because like if you've got that mechanism kind of built into you, that's part of you that you can just figure things out. I don't need you to have the dictionary of every single JavaScript command ever created like in your head. I don't care.
Right.
Like, do you know how to figure it out in a pretty quick way and do it in a nice, clean way? Because again, it runs on top of everything else. So that's what I'm always looking for.
What do you think, Cory?
So in addition to what they were saying, I think you don't want someone who's just going to freeze up if they get a more vague request of what the direction is. Like you would ideally want someone to come back with questions to try to get a little bit further into the conversation.
Right.
And you would want to also have somebody, I think, that would know specifically when they could figure out, okay, based off what you're asking, if I built it this way, that would be bad, but I could build it this way and that would be good. And maybe make those two different paths known to the person, because one might be client side, but if you could do it server side, you could avoid the performance loss. Maybe that's the way that you should build it. And it's less taking what the business wants directly, but coming out to the same result in the way that you think is technically best.
Yeah. Yep. And what do you guys, Cory, what do you look for? Like if you're looking for a job, what are you looking for in the job description? And what aren't you looking for? What would be a red flag?
I'm not a designer. So if they wanted me to do design, that would probably not be a thing that I would pursue.
Yep.
I would mostly be looking for, I would expect JavaScript, HTML, CSS to be there. Anything related to maybe segmentation type discussions.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. And going back to what you were saying on the previous question, that actually has been something that I have heard from other devs as that's a turnoff for them, because once you start getting into high amounts of segmentation and personalization, it can be complex to maintain that and understand how it works.
Sure.
And a lot of people I have talked to aren't interested in doing that on essentially what they view as throwaway code, because the test, if it doesn't win, you throw it out. And even if it does win, if it was like client side, you're probably not going to reuse that. So you set that aside and use that as the basis for how you would build it into the page directly.
Right.
And a lot of, at least in the folks I've talked to, are looking for like a more long-term project thing and not constantly iterating and cycling through projects in a rapid fashion. So that could be something that would indicate that they're not a good fit.
That's a great point.
I fully agree with that. One of the things I put in my job requirement is the fact that in so little words is that you will you will see the fruits of your labor. One of the things I've found over time interviewing different devs is that they don't really ever get a chance to see what their efforts do.
Yeah, we talked about that.
And this is one of the ones where you get to see it, because I mean, you get to see it go live. You get to see it. Sometimes, I mean, my dev actually does some analytics too, so he gets a chance to really get into it. So, yeah, it's kind of self-fulfilling for them.
Yeah, I know that was a big thing for me when I first got into the optimization space. It's like, wait, so I get to change this banner and then like hundreds of thousands of people see it? That's pretty cool.
Right. I get to see like, dollar impact of my work. It's kind of impressive. Yeah. That's one of my favorite things about the optimization space. That came over from the pure digital analytics space, which is fantastic because you're constantly learning, but you don't get to see as much the impact of what you've learned. Whereas optimization, you can take what you've learned in analytics and then test it and measure the effects. So.
And when you meet with a candidate who is not familiar with that space and you tell them that, and like that jaw drop that they do, like, yeah, it's a really good feeling.
Yeah. All right. Val's got another good question, so we're just going to go with it. Oh, stop, Val. I can't keep up. I'm just kidding. She asks, is it better for you guys, as optimization devs, is it better to work in something like Jira, like a developer's turf, or in something else where we can outline the tech specs with our testing tools and templates, so like the CRO turf? And she's specifically asking because our test specs rarely fit nicely into user stories and the default fields of Jira. So it's a square peg, round hole at times, but often that's the best way for you all to track activity status, plan resources within dev sprint cycles.
Well, I can start on that one.
Yeah.
So I've actually found that I don't like any of the existing tools out there because our space is so unique that I strongly dislike when templates are provided, because normally we can't use them at all. And so I just have to kind of throw all that out and just kind of start over anyway. And so sometimes that could actually make it more difficult. And then on the other side of that spectrum, so if you try to use some of like the existing like dev workflow tools and Jira and all that kind of stuff, yeah, that usually has way too many fields, a bunch of stuff that we don't care about. And then it's all these kind of crazy like required fields, and you're just kind of going through the motions just to try to get it in there. So that usually doesn't work super well either. The things that I have seen work kind of well are like ticketing type of things, like kind of Jira kind of is, right? But if you simplify it a little bit, just a way to track the work. Because ultimately, you just, one doesn't fit all, not necessarily. It's more like if you kind of either develop your own tool, which is kind of scary to folks, but really I guess what I'm trying to say in the end is just keep it simple, because it's all about tracking the workflow. Because there's fewer details, right? As long as you just give me like some kind of design doc, like here's what we're trying to do, here's the analytics that we want to track, this is kind of what we want it to look like, that's usually enough. That's what I need, right? And then put the assets in there. That'd be nice too if you attach some graphics or whatever. So just some, in email, that's not good because then stuff gets lost. Like I've tried that before. That just doesn't work. But you don't need a full-on crazy workflow tracking system either. Just some way to say like, okay, yeah, person A put in this thing from the marketing team.
Here's the handshake.
The handshake needs to happen. All the assets are in there. So your design doc, your graphics, your whatever, it's all in there. And then you can kind of see like, okay, what status is it in? Is it in development? Is it ready for QA, whatever? Just some kind of simple thing like that, just so there's a central repository that tends to work the best, at least from what I've seen.
Makes sense.
I would agree with that. And with that said, you can modify Jira's workflow if you want to invest the time. And it's really just who has, especially if you're going through like copywriters and designers and stuff, if they can buy into that, you can see what phase of the development the different part of the flow is at. And I have found it to be super helpful for like QA folks to have like a ticket to reference with the spec and the what you're going for, and if there's technical notes on how they would actually have to build their test cases, things like that.
That feeds right into Lee's question. She just asked on the Slack, are you saying, no, that wasn't Lee, it was Beryl. Where does the Q&A role fit typically? Do you guys think it fits in a separate QA team? Do you think the devs should be doing QA? Is it some combination of that?
I think the dev should do their initial self QA, but I don't think they should have final QA, because the dev who coded it is going to have blind spots to what they did. So
Right.
you either want a dedicated QA person, ideally one that's well-versed in how testing works, testing and optimization, or you want another developer that's at least very familiar with the optimization system to like walk through that and then actively try to break it and see if they can.
Yeah, yeah. And so from your perspective, you know, you're checking your own code, and then somebody else is checking your code. And then do you guys think that there should be somebody on the front end? Like, you know, oftentimes a program manager, a test manager, optimization lead, somebody is doing like the visual type check as well.
Well, what we do is we have a handoff where the designer and the UX person can look at it before it goes to QA. Because after it goes to QA, if they have something, then I code it, then it goes back to QA again. So you'd want to have all of the people sign off on it prior to your final validations.
Yep. And Valerie just asked you a specific question, Cory. She says, don't hate me for asking, but on the off chance that it is appropriate to test for a test to be developed using a WYSIWYG, would y'all be cool with an analyst building the test and then an optimization dev doing code review of the code that was built from the WYSIWYG? Nice answer. You want to unpack that a little?
The reason that I say that is with WYSIWYG editors.
Wait. You have to repeat what you said, because
Okay,
everybody's on Slack.
I was like, after I'm done crying, possibly. So with WYSIWYG editors, they, depending on how well they're written, can write some really atrocious code.
Yeah.
But additionally, if the analyst isn't well versed in how that specific website works, and it has a React, for example, or Angular or something, sure, the test might show up initially, and then when the page state changes, the page doesn't recognize the test did anything and overwrites it, so it breaks the test. And that's where I would discourage analysts from doing that unless they're very well familiar and have talked to their dev team about how suitable that is for their specific tech stack.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. Like, you have to know the site that you're working with first before you even then start building your stuff on top of that. I see that problem come up all the time where it's like, yeah, it worked that first time, but yeah, not the other 99 different ways you can load the page.
Right. So would you guys both say don't use WYSIWYGs? Or would you say let the devs use the WYSIWYGs?
It works okay for the simple stuff. So I think the key there is finding that threshold. So if you kind of have that conversation with the folks and say, all right, this is the world that you can live in, and then anything beyond that line, now you're in developer world.
Like a decision tree?
Yeah, if you want to go that far, I suppose you could do that. Or usually it's a pretty short list, so you don't even need a big tree.
And I would say it works, again, if you've identified that it works for your site and what you're trying to do isn't overly complex. That said, different industries do have code reviews as requirements to deploy anything, so that you have to keep that in mind. The thing I would definitely caution folks about is if you're going to be on a site, that you know it works, you should periodically check in with your development team so they don't inadvertently break it, because if they're not in the optimization mindset, they're probably not thinking about it.
Yep. Yep. And I know that there are tools that have better WYSIWYGs than others. So, I mean, I think it would be good if you're in the market and you're trying to evaluate a tool and WYSIWYG is one of the things you care about, you should have a dev that can evaluate the code that's created by the WYSIWYG against other tools that you're evaluating, because I think that should, if you plan to use it, let's make sure it's as high quality as possible. So. Oh my gosh, Val is a troublemaker. So let's talk about, like, do you guys think you could do your job? Do you think that for clients you support or your company, if they didn't have the budget for a full-time optimization dev, do you think that works? And how would you go about, if they can't afford a full-time dev, how would they support an optimization program?
That was actually my role. I was a what I like to refer to as a Stack Overflow developer.
Yep.
I am not a developer at all, but that is how we got through 2.5 years without a developer. And we knew that in order to sell the rest of the business on a developer joining our stack was velocity. There was nothing really else out there. Some efficiency, obviously, too, because my 250 lines of code were wrapped up in about 50 with our front-end developer. So, like I said, Stack Overflow, it's weird, isn't it? So, showing the velocity, and that's how I was able to get headcount. I got a contractor came in, and I just showed him, like, all right, so from intake to execution was about 1.5 months for me, and it was about less than a day for him. So it's and these were larger projects, right?
Good.
This is 100%. And these weren't just like your WYSIWYG stuff. It was it's
Sure.
pretty funny because I would get into some WYSIWYG and I would get into some hard coding, but for the most part, these were what we like to refer to now as simple tests. And it's taken me some time to get it done right before you turn it on. Oh crap, I broke something, turn it off, fix it, turn it back on. Crap, I broke something, turn it back off.
Right.
Clean from the beginning with a front-end developer.
Yep.
What I would say, because I also did that part-time for a long period of time, is even if they're not building the test for you, working with the IT staff to at least get a developer to, like, look over what you're trying to do. Is this even feasible for your site? Is going to save you a lot of time, because one, they can point out things that you may have overlooked before you send it off to your vendor to have them build it.
Sure.
Two, they can actually tell you that's not going to work and tell you why before you spend the money to have the vendor review it and then come back with you saying that can't be done.
Yep.
Yeah, one of the problems that rears its ugly head in a variety of ways in the optimization space is that unknown, right? So in this case, we're talking about the technical unknown of, like, oh yeah, if I do it in here, it looks fine. And then you're just completely unaware of all the stuff that's breaking that you never even knew to go look at in the first place.
Right.
So yeah, I've seen that come up in different ways. Like, we call it, test leakage of, like, oh, well, I set it to run on this URL, but you didn't know about the other 7 URLs that are actually structured the same way. And those are pages you never look at. So now your test is also running on those pages. So it's actually running on 8, not just the one you thought it was running on. So yeah, it's that whole it's that unknown realm that you got to have somebody that kind of knows that space a little bit. And yeah, you just have to pull that in. You may not always need it, but yeah, it's good to at least have some check along the way.
Yeah, a lot of mine was browser performance. That's not a lot of things that you as a non-developer can really understand as to what the performance impacts are going to be on the customer side. A front-end developer will know where to kind of what space to play in. A person like me is just like, it's a code. If I'm just putting code up there, I'm just going to go ahead and get it done, right? It looks fine on my screen, right? I've got a sticker on my computer that says it works on my computer. So like that's exactly what I was doing. So getting that front-end developer is like, yeah, you can't do that. It's going to bog down older browsers or browsers with whatever happens to be. They know what these things do, and I don't.
Yeah, going back to, oh, go ahead, Cory.
The one thing I'd caution people, and I'm not saying anything negative about people who look up all of their code on Stack Overflow. But depending on what you're trying to do, that code may not be supported on all of the browsers that you are trying to cover as new feature sets have rolled out. And this has become less an issue as like IE 8 has faded off and things, but there's still stuff that IE 10 can't do that 11 can. And if that's a large portion of your user base, that limits or could change how you actually have to construct the code to do the same thing. And a developer would know that, theoretically.
Yep. Or, oh, do you happen to have a part of your website in China? Well, okay, have fun with that, because it's a whole different browser set over there. So going back to the, what skills do you look for in a developer thing? It's like, for me, speed and efficiency and performance of the code is a huge thing, because going back to that stack, right? Like the website has to get built, and then whatever you're doing is on top of that. So you don't even usually get to start until a little bit later in the flow, because you're waiting for stuff to get built. I mean, there's tricks and things you can do that you learn that are very unique to the optimization space. But just running and writing as efficient code as you possibly can is key, because there's that whole flicker thing that we're trying to avoid too. We don't want people to see the old content before we get the new stuff in there. So anything I can do to kind of not slow down that process helps tremendously.
Yeah, I think explaining to a front-end developer too, especially one who is not one currently and you're trying to onboard, is that you are really a DOM manipulator. That is your space. You are working in DOM manipulation. You're not working in back-end code. You're not working in, well, unless you're doing server-side testing. But for the most part, when you're talking about Flickr and you're talking about showing content, hiding it, showing your own, or opacity, this and whatnot, that's not a concept a non-optimization developer understands. It isn't until it took him probably about 6 months to really understand. I'm like, you are really manipulating DOM. Just understand that. And once you understand that, it was like a light bulb just went off in his head, and boom, then our efficiencies just went off the charts.
I still remember the ridiculously long conversation we had, Chris, when I first started at Dell, and you were trying to explain to me what DOM swizzle meant. And I'm like, you're speaking in a different language. And you're very patient, and you're drawing circles on a page, and you're like, okay, we're going to take this content and we're going to move it in this place. And I'm like, what? But I don't get it. And I got there, I think. I kind of get it. I know that you do it. But I get that completely, because if you think of, most web devs, to Cory's point, you guys start frequently with existing code and have to make things look the way we want them to look and behave the way we want them to behave. Traditional web devs start with a blank slate and build it, which has to be a little bit more efficient at minimum. So how would you guys, I'm going to get to your question, don't worry, Val, but first I want to know, how would you guys advise somebody who was a traditional dev? How could they independently start researching and learning and playing around to learn how to become an optimization dev if they were interested in doing so?
Optimize is free. And if you
Google Optimize?
So if you use Google Optimize, but you don't use the visual editor, you go in and actually write code blocks and then have it load on a page and just try to get it to do something. And
play
that way, and then understand how Optimize works. Read all the documentation for it, etc. Because a lot of the other client-side systems work in a similar fashion.
Yeah.
The UI is different, and the commands might be slightly different, but I'm saying it's the same basic concepts. So if you understand the concepts, you can apply them to different platforms.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because the concepts are the same. So if you can kind of find a way to learn and wrap your head around the concepts, then it's just a matter of terminology and what thing do I click in this tool to make that thing happen. So it's really, like you were saying, once you kind of understand, oh, here's the circles and here's how they overlap and here's how the DOM stuff works, you understand the concepts, then it's just a matter of figuring out how to execute it in whatever tool.
Yep. All right. So Val's question for the whole panel: what's your biggest pet peeve?
This is being recorded, right? Have to think on that one.
I guess I have a couple.
I'll let him go first.
I have a couple, and one of the things I look for in a developer is somebody who's willing to work with a business. My biggest pet peeve is the developer who comes in knowing that and still isn't. It still hasn't quite transitioned out of that traditional role and is still kind of, they're still in the corner. They still have their headphones on. They're still not, they're not partaking in the conversations. They're not.
The one who's waiting for you to tell them what to do.
They're still in that traditional mindset. And I guess that's probably one of my biggest pet peeve. I guess my second one too, and when you work with different personalities, you start to pick this up, is the developer who comes in as a know-it-all and makes it's kind of belittling. And I've dealt with that a number of times now too, where it's like they treat the business stakeholders like they're stupid, and it's like you kind of have to rein them back, be like they are stupid in a sense because they don't do this, right? Do you know how to plumb your bathtub? Like you probably don't. So don't go in there and expect people to know how to do this kind of stuff. Take this as a development tool to say, so instead of you not knowing and you should know, here's how you should. Here, let me explain it to you.
Right.
So the one that is, again, a little bit more proactive and is understanding and can explain to business stakeholders what a DOM. I spent 2 years explaining to most of our stakeholders what a DOM was. What is that? So being able to get them on that same page, whether they want to learn it or not, is just a very valuable tool. So the one that's not doing that is.
I have to combine them because I find in my role, my biggest pet peeve, fortunately, I don't work with any of these people right now, but in my past life, I have worked with devs who know it all and say no to everything without troubleshooting. Because that's not possible.
Yeah, they completely brush it off and they move on, expecting it to go away.
That a little? Can we find a solution? Is there another way to approach this problem? That's why,
Marketers don't let things go away, especially if they have a great idea in their head. That's
right.
Kind of a.
Right. Did you have enough time to think, Chris?
Yeah, that gave me some really good ideas, so I can just kind of add on to that one. And it's, I guess, kind of in general, it's somebody that is either unwilling or unable to change. And so that kind of manifests in a couple of different ways. It's either if it's a developer and I've peer reviewed their code and I've told them the same thing 10 times in a row now, like, dude, don't write your stuff that way. You'll write it this other way. And then the 11th time, it's still the old way. It's like, I've shown you the better way 10 times now. Like, what's going on? That can be kind of frustrating. And then, on the business side, if you're working with the marketing folks or the design folks and you're like, okay, yes, we could do it that way, but it'd be a lot easier or a lot better or whatever if we kind of, are you at least willing to sort of modify your plans for like the greater good, if you want to kind of use that term, right? So it's like, for whatever variety of reasons, it's better for X, Y, and Z. Can we just maybe, and usually it's just a little tweak, like, okay, instead of doing exactly this thing, can we maybe modify it a little bit? And are you open to having that discussion? Because if you're not, then it's so hard to work with those kind of folks. But if you're willing to kind of work with me a little bit, and then so everything's better overall, like that is so much easier to work with.
Yep. How about you, Cory?
I would say using your optimization platform long-term as a content management system.
Yes. Look at Chris and David, everybody. So like Cory just won, mic drop,
double face palm. Yeah.
For two different reasons. One, while you're running it, it's a performance loss on the page. Two, while it's being delivered by the system, people are going to forget about it because it's not in the code repos. So the chance of they're going to break it increases exponentially, like the longer that delay is, because they go and they look at the server code, right? And they're just like, oh, that's not a thing that we have. Why does the page do that? It's not in the code. And I've seen developers spend 2-3 days on that, and they don't realize that there's a test overriding it because they're not part of that world.
Yep.
Yeah, that really messes with the QA process too, because they don't expect.
It really does.
Yeah.
Yep. Everybody hear that? Everybody who is a program lead of an optimization program, your testing tool is not your CMS. Everybody repeat that. Your
I
test
think the problem is
not
that
your
at some
test.
point it will be. Like
Yes,
it's
but
kind of
not
sad.
long
It's like
term.
it's part of that onboarding, that crawl, walk, run stage.
Yes.
It's like that during that crawl stage. It's like, well, if we just make all those changes through Target.
Push it. We'll just push it all live.
Yeah, of course.
It's just a short period of time. Just
Right.
until production happens in 2
2
years.
or 3 years. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. That's what
I will add a little point to what Cory just said is one of my evangelistic properties that I have in my role is to make sure I am friends with all those the traditional devs on our team, the ones that are actually doing the work inside the content management systems, the ones who are pushing doing sprint releases and whatnot. We've got them pretty well trained in making sure that they have the tools at their disposal to understand, as I'm making changes to these pages or these sets of pages, how can I understand what is or what isn't running on these pages? And that ongoing relationship that I have with them has been it's made life so much easier. So now they know as part of their QA process, is there a test running on this page? Are we executing bits of code on this page that we normally wouldn't be through the server side, what the server would be normally serving? So that is invaluable moving into your optimization.
Yeah. Yep. So we've got about 3 minutes left. I'm going to ask the question real quick, and then we're going to round robin David, Chris, and Cory. If you guys would each be willing to share any external resources that you use on a regular basis or that you would recommend because you used it earlier and it taught you a bunch of stuff. Specifically for optimization devs, either current or future hope to be optimization devs. And I'm looking at everything from like websites you use, tools you use, conferences you recommend, communities, whatever. And again, I'll start with you, David.
So tools in terms of how I was looking for a dev or how I train them, or
anything you think an optimization dev could use or that you would use to find an optimization dev, whatever.
Generally speaking, I spend about a good couple months with them at the beginning, and I'm really running them through everything from our side. I mean, most of our team, we call ourselves the MarTech stack. I mean, we're mostly technical in nature anyways. We are not salespeople, even though we sit under a sales organization. We are not marketing people, even though we like pretty pictures too. But for the most part, it's really about that during that onboarding process of going through and training them on the things that I can't train them on. Yeah.
The things they can't learn before they join you. The things they can't get because it's
like when in the interview process, I tell them I cannot train you. I cannot teach you on front-end development. That's what I'm going to be expecting from you. I can train you on the other items and whatnot. So a lot of what I've learned, and this is just simply through, again, things like TLC, things like optimization conferences, is just kind of touch basing with other people who are doing this and just kind of getting some of those pros and cons, and then just molding that to our business and how we onboard developers on our side.
Awesome. Chris?
Yeah, so it really is those two worlds, right? There's that traditional development world, and then there's the entirety of the optimization space. And that's the part no one ever knows. So yeah, if you're looking to get into that world, the optimization world, actually, I found some really interesting articles over the years. So I would recommend like looking into like what Netflix has done and what Amazon has done, and like find those articles, because they've actually like laid out like 10-page long articles about like, here's the testing that we've been doing. So you can kind of get a sense of like what is possible. And then it's not on just web pages, right? So it's like, oh, you can get Netflix loaded up on your TV, and they've found interesting technologies to insert A/B testing little fragments in there, and it can do its thing.
Like the interleaving example, that one's amazing.
Yeah, and just like the way that they change the pictures around. Oh, if we do ones with more colors, more people will click on them. And so if you can read those kind of things and get a handle on like the concepts, then that'll much more easily translate into the actual implementation side.
Sure. Awesome. Cory?
I would say, especially with the changes that the different browsers are doing for all their state management stuff, definitely follow up on their blogs and pay attention to what's coming down on the different platforms that you may have to now suddenly account for in your testing.
Yeah.
Because they're going to change it or break it in new and interesting ways. So got to keep all of that in mind. And then the different Slack channels, Measure and TLC, are good. You can probably get some help on different questions in there. CXL runs a blog that occasionally, while it's more focused toward marketers, they occasionally talk on some of the more technical concepts.
Yeah.
And then with what Chris said, Amazon and Netflix do white papers, and Netflix does like videos on YouTube where they explain their testing and personalization platforms and stuff. And then it's, okay, well, they did this. What would it take me to do that in my tech stack? Is that feasible? Do we actually have a use case for that? Things like that.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. This has been a lot of fun. I'm going to be honest and tell everybody that before we have these conversations, I send out like a bulleted list to my panelists about the topics that we're going to have, and they typically maybe read it and maybe add a couple of comments. I sent out a bulleted list to these 3 guys, and I got back 4 pages of notes. These guys are absolute rock stars. Best panel I've had in a while, and I really appreciate it. I appreciate the work that you did to be here, and I appreciate how engaged you all were, and I love all these notes, and we will add into the Slack and the email all the links that you guys provided and shared and the things that you referred to. I'm going to go find some of the Netflix and Amazon examples if I can, and I'll share that with you guys. So thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly.